Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to yet another uLaw webinar. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about how you can get ready for your Law Society audit. Now, this particular webinar has been approved for 1 hour of CPD credits, both within the Law Society of Upper Canada as well as the Law Society of New Brunswick. So we welcome our friends and lawyer friends, legal friends from the province of New Brunswick to participate in this webinar as well. I kindly request you to mute your phone lines and ask your questions, if there are any, through our chat window, and our support staff would be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. Okay, so getting ready for a Law Society audit is truly the topic of today's webinar. And with any uLaw webinar, today's webinar similarly has an agenda. And the agenda is truly to talk about the audit process, but the different subcomponents that cover what that audit process looks like. How do you prepare yourself for that particular audit? And what are the core components that the Law Society is looking to audit you upon, right? So this is well established. It's set up front, and there's enough time that's given before you're audited. In some cases, there are spot audits, but a good majority of the audits give you enough time to collate all the information that they're looking for so that you have the time to prepare yourself. But the question that we want to ask in trying to disrupt this industry is, can you be prepared for that audit right from the get-go, right from day one? How can you prepare yourself for that audit instead of having to scamper over the course of those 2 or 3 weeks where you've been given that window of opportunity? And when you look at the different reviews, we've kind of broken it down into 4 major review components, if you will. The practice review, which talks about the methodologies, the procedures, and the process that you follow, how you manage your books, your records, and how you are ready for that review, including the use of practice management, policies, etc. Client intake, how do you establish rules that govern an engagement with the client? And then we look at the financial review. Okay, but the financial review is obviously one of the key components of the review document, especially if you're a legal professional who is dealing with trust accounts or trust money. This is something that the Law Society looks at very seriously. So you're looking at trust documents, whether that's ledgers, journals, or the general accounts. So the same thing where you're looking at ledgers, journals, expense books, fee books, the disbursement journals as well. And any procedural documentation, such as deposit slips, and based on the jurisdiction that you're in, certain Form 9As or other forms that are required, especially when you do electronic fund transfer between a trust account and a general account. Okay, so we looked at practice review. We're going to further break it down into subcomponents later in the webinar. But at a very high level, we're looking at practice review, and then we looked at financial review and all the ledgers and journals, reconciliation statements that are required to be a part of that. And then we look at what we call a technology review. So the Law Society obviously has certain policies about technology and how it's best used to serve clients, and how you as a legal professional are appraising your client about the technology involved. How do you ensure that there's enough backup procedures that the client feels confident that the data that you store on your behalf is secure? What are the different procedures that you use? Do you use a cloud-based technology, or is it desktop-based? And if so, what are the pros and cons? So you having to communicate the risks and rewards of the technological solutions that you use to run your practice is something that's being looked upon under the technology review as well. And with the advent of technology in today's context, the lawyer of today is, the legal professional of today is mobile friendly. There's multiple things that need to be done, taking advantage of cloud as well as the mobile devices. You're looking to be much more fluid or flexible in how you deal with clients and communication. So we're going to look at what are the components of that technology review that you need to be aware of as part of that audit process. And last but not the least, obviously it's looking at the professional conduct review. It's how are you in terms of conducting yourself as a legal professional in this industry, be it conduct in terms of your behavior. That could include time management. It could include communication, your personal aura. Sometimes, making sure that there are no, complaints against you as your firm for conduct-related issues from the public. And most of what we've heard from our clients who do go through this process in terms of a conduct review is ensuring that you have everything possible to deal with the timeliness of your presence, let's say at court. That's one of the key components that people look at. Have you missed court days? And if so, have praised your client up front. Those are the types of things that we look upon when you look at, professional rules of conduct review, right? And last but not least, we want to talk about, given that these are all the rules that govern your audit process, how can you use legal accounting solutions and audit-proof yourself? How do you ensure that these accounting solutions, practice management software, can give you the necessary tools to help you equip yourself right from get-go to be audit-ready from day one, keeping these core components in mind? Okay. And before I jump into kind of defining all those core components of this review process, let's quickly define what that audit process is. And the purpose of an audit, truly is to support and promote high-quality law firm or legal firm record keeping by answering questions and providing guidance regarding trust, gender record keeping, mortgages wherever applicable, and providing the necessary compliance governed by the Law Society for audit requirements. Okay? And truly it's designed by nature as a means of being proactive in understanding and measuring truly any problems early on in how you've learned how to manage these numbers, these documents, and you being not only a legal professional but also being a business owner and managing these trust funds in the most appropriate manner. Okay, so misappropriation of trust money is one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest problems that the legal industry has. We've heard recent stories about lawyers, being disqualified or being barred from the Law Society because of misuse of trust money. So the audit process is truly to understand and measure and be kind of a more proactive measure, if you will, to give you the guidelines and bring you back to track if you're kind of segueing away from what's required for you to be as a legal professional. Okay? And financial record keeping is something that we find is not necessarily taught at school, because you're being taught to be a lawyer at school or a legal professional at school, and hence this is a bit of a delta between what you've learned and what you're required to practice, and hence bringing you back on track and giving you those guidelines within which you need to run your business is critical, and the audit process is one of those processes that helps you with that. So the question really is, what am I being audited on? So this is an important question that you want to ask yourself, because, fortune does not, favor the brave. The fortune favors the prepared mind, right? So with that being the context, how prepared can you be for this audit, as we mentioned, right from day one? It doesn't have to be at the last minute. So we looked at those 4 critical components that we've broken it down to. We've kind of broken down the entire audit documentation that the Law Society has published it, and kind of broken it down into these 4 components. You've got your practice review. The practice review contains of how you manage your client communication, matters or the files that you open up for your clients, and all the procedures and the process that go along of how you define managing, maintaining, and closing those files for your clients, and the communication that happens including documents that you share with your clients, starting with a client communication document, a retainer agreement, or client engagement agreement, to the last statement of activity, including your accounts being delivered and the invoices in between, right? Then we look at the financial review. So let's say you've done the client intake, you've communicated properly, you've done all the right things of invoicing on time, all the information on your retainer letter looks fine and dandy. And then it comes down to, once the invoices have been raised, once the matter has been closed, how do those documents collate themselves to be ready for a financial review? And these are everything that we looked at, right from trust and general. Now, if in your firm's case you're only dealing with the general account and you don't have a trust account, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you are in the habit of accepting retainers and trust money, then you obviously have to be prudent about knowing trust, general ledgers, journals. And when it comes to general accounting too, the Law Society does look at your fee book, your expense book, your disbursement journals. So there's all components that your reconciliation statements. So the Law Society does provide you with guidelines that at a minimum you do a reconciliation once a month. And we're looking at how legal accounting software has really improved the whole process of how it enables you to do those reconciliations in a much faster pace. Okay, so we looked at all those different financial documents under the financial review are looked at. Technology review is really about, the safety measures that you or your law firm has, the policies that are governing how you safeguard the data of your client. Okay, how do you manage with technology failures? Do you have backup procedures? How do you ensure that you're timely available using the technology? So not only is it an advantage for you to use technology, it's also equally important to document and be able to articulate the different policies that you have in mind when it comes to technology being used to safeguard data. Okay, and last but not the least, we look at professional time management review. Spoke about that very briefly early on. Though it's a bit outside of the legal accounting and practice management for a time management is something practice management tools enable with. A shared calendar, being able to integrate with multiple devices, including mobile devices, that gives you a full view of your legal firm's month or week, so that you're always on time, you're managing your time across multiple clients. Then there's other components, as we mentioned, about conduct, behavioral, etc. Right? So now that we've kind of looked at, what is being audited on, we want to focus on how do you prepare for that audit, okay? And what does it take for a law firm to pass that audit in flying colors and, to stay healthy as a law firm? And the first statement we have there is something we truly believe in. We've had conversations with auditors. We've had conversations with our clients, legal friends who've gone through an audit process. And we want to firmly believe that the Law Society and the audits are not necessarily meant to scare your firm. It's definitely a very strict exercise that was established predominantly as a proactive measure to, as I mentioned, to measure your ability to deliver the audit reports or the review processes that's governed by the Law Society. So under the context, the documentation in between. So it's really meant to be a proactive measure to ensure that you're on track. It was really not designed, if you will, to scare you or to be really fearful of. Obviously, if you have not done the necessary tasks that can articulate or outline those documents, then there's a bit of a fear that's established, because you do have a lot of catch-up to do in the last minute. So there's always the issue, just like preparing yourself for an examination at the last minute. It's kind of the same analogy, if you will. So the real question is, I mean, if you can, why don't you just start, to start study from day one? If it's easier to just start studying from day one, as our parents have mentioned before, why don't we just do that? And from a lawyer's perspective, how best can you take advantage of technology in today's context of being that 21st, 22nd century lawyer to enable you to be audit ready right from day one? Okay. So some examples. Reviewing your practice procedures on a regular basis, say on a monthly or a quarterly basis. Reviewing your financial statements, so you or your law firm reviewing these financial statements on more of a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis instead of just looking at it a once a month aspect, right? Having a checklist, right, so you can really break it down by time period. What are the different types of components of my legal business do I have to review over a week, over a month, let's say a quarter, or even an annual basis? We've got some examples, and this is by no means a specific set of examples. This is just a few examples that came to mind, and we've kind of categorized it as we feel fit within those timelines. So on a weekly basis, obviously it makes a lot of sense for you to review your bank accounts, right? So ensure that you're reviewing your bank transactions, and if possible, reconcile your bank transactions between your bookkeeping software and your real-life bank accounts. That way you're caught up. At the end of every Friday or Saturday, if you can catch up that particular week that's passed, then when it comes to the monthly reconciliation report, you can feel very confident about generating that because you've done all the due diligence on a weekly basis and have caught up instead of doing it the last minute. And sometimes it's just a memory game, right? So when the memory is fresh, you want to do it and capture that as and when it happens and ensure that you capture that reconciliation and really review all those transactions as and when they happen. A good example of, let's say, a monthly financial checklist would be your journals and your reconciliation statements, as I just mentioned. As much as you want to reconcile and make sure you've done all this, an actual document in terms of a statement is well warranted to be done on a monthly basis. Looking at your journals, looking at your ledgers, right? And a good candidate from a quarterly practice management checklist could be the policies on client communication, time management, professional commitment, so really seeing if you've caught up on all of your CPDs. Like today's webinar is accredited for 1 hour of CPD. It's great that we've got this audience attending today's session. So catching up on your CPD on a quarterly basis, again, instead of scampering in the last minute in December for that year's CPD quota, is something that you can do proactively. And last but not the least, any procedures that you can deal with matter management. So your retainer letters. Do you want to tweak those retainer letters? Have you just decided to come up with a new policy to top up your retainers after, let's say, if it's come down to $500? So there's many things that you can consider that you can be better at on these timely basis. And a good annual review would truly be understanding your business, okay? Really taking a quick introspective view of how your business has performed over the last 12 months and really understanding areas of practice where you've done well. You can even break it down by geography to say if there's a specific city or town or municipality where you're actually doing well within the particular area of practice. So there's many things that you may want to review, but where you want to spend those marketing dollars in the coming year, what's working, what's not working, etc. Right? All of this helps in many ways, both directly and in a very subliminal way towards your preparation for that audit. Okay, so let's break it down. We had our practice management checklist, our financial checklist, a technology review checklist, as well as the conduct, professionalism and conduct timeline checklist as well. We're going to be focusing primarily on, for today's webinar at least, a lot on the practice management, financial, and a bit of technology as well. Okay, so I'll Getting started with, what is a practice management checklist? We've kind of broken it down again by subcomponents. One of the first things that auditors are looking for is the client service and communication. Okay, so under that subcomponent, things such as how do you manage a retainer? Do you have a well-drafted retainer document that makes it easy for your client to understand the engagement that they have or what they're signing up for in retaining you as a legal professional, right? So is it clear in that retainer agreement about the amount that's being paid, the top-ups, the obligations that you have in communicating to them the balance in trust through, let's say, an invoice or a statement of activity, right? Do you have a process or procedure of communicating how you plan on docketing during the course of that matter, right? Are you planning on a time and material docket, or are you planning for a flat fee, or if it's a combination, or if it's a contingency way of docketing your matter? These are things that would be important for you to communicate through that, either through the retainer agreement or a client engagement document as well, right? If there are other parties involved in the matter, how do you deal with joint retainers? How do you deal with payments? Is this a 30-day payment term? Is it a 15-day payment term? What happens if the client does not pay you in time? What are the policies? What is the interest, if there is any, that you would charge? But here's just a few set of examples of client and communication that's really important for you to keep in mind as you prepare yourself for that practice management review, right? If things don't work out well, or it could be for many reasons, do you have a plan for how you can non-engage the client, either from your end, or if the client were to non-engage you, what is the procedure to deal with non-engagement? Do you have a template or a document readily available that outlines that? So these are some of the questions that auditors we've understood do ask on a timely basis during their audit process. So it's not just about the financial documents and the numbers. These are equally critical components of that audit process. Okay. Now let's say we've come through the client aspect to it. So you've agreed to retain this client. They've signed up for a retainer. They've retained you. Now comes the aspect of how do you manage the file or the matter. Okay. Do you have a good process to name your files? As fundamental and as simple as it may seem, one of the challenges we find, again going back to your time management, is if you don't have a proper way of automating your file naming conventions or managing your files, it just becomes harder for you to search for information. One of the biggest factors of time in a law firm's life is searching for information, whether that's file-based or information-based, right? It all starts with the file number. One of the examples I like to share is one of our clients had the situation before they automated using a legal accounting software such as uLaw, was they were doing this manually. And as a process, they actually had a file number by client, regardless of how many matters that they dealt with. So if it was for the same Tommy Jones, and if it was a matter for a real estate purchase, they had the same file number. If it was a real estate sale, it was the same file number. And that's something that's definitely frowned upon. You certainly want to have unique file numbers for each matter, but you also want to have it in a way that's easily searchable as well. Okay. An important component of the retainer letter beyond the retainer amount itself is truly the nature scope. Okay, so what is that you're going to utilize your skills for within that matter? What is the nature scope? Is this a family matter, or is just a small claim matter? Really coming down to what that file is about, and also dealing with how you plan on approaching that matter, right? So it's important that all those components are well documented, whether that's a retainer or an engagement letter. A quick question also that comes across in your audits is, Again, going back to time management, going back to having better clarity and always being on top of your firm's information is, do you have a policy to categorize your files, right? Are all files the same? Or if you've actually dealt with a particular file or matter and have already taken care of it and it's closed, do you have a process to categorize or classify these files into, and a good example would be active, closed, archived, or you can actually come up with your own terminology of classifying these so that your focus is always on those active files and you're using these closed or archived more from a conflict screening perspective, right? Disbursements is one of the hot topics within a file. Again, providing clarity to your client about how you want to deal with disbursements becomes very critical. Now, if there's a retainer involved in that file, the question is, as a lawyer or as a legal professional, do you plan on handling that disbursement through trust, where the money is just withdrawn directly from the trust account? Or if you want to use your Aeroplan miles and use your own credit card or your business credit card to pay off those disbursements, then that's got to be documented as well. In which case, you would obviously pay that disbursement through your, let's say, your business credit card from your general account. You'd go ahead and raise an invoice to that client for that matter, and then reimburse that to yourself, right? Or recover that expense. And last but not the least, do you have a proper procedure to close out these files? If there's money owing, do you have a way to write off the dollars amount? And these are very practical and pragmatic steps that you're expected to exercise as part of managing those funds. Okay? A very important closing document would be statement or a settlement account. Okay, and that could be all the work that you've done for that matter and the total amount that you've received and you've spent, so that that's something that you can send to your client. And there's a logical closure to that relationship with that client for that particular matter. Now, without spending too much of time, we obviously want to highlight certain critical components, and this is purely from experience perspective and what we've heard from the industry as well in terms of a retainer document. As per Wikipedia, a retainer is a fee that's paid in advance to someone, especially an attorney, in order to secure or keep their services when required. And from a law society standpoint, the fact that someone's actually giving you money in advance in trust, in the true meaning of that word, it's equally important that there are boundaries of how you can utilize that trust money. Okay? You want to always make sure that you don't knowingly or unknowingly misappropriate trust accounts or trust money. And that's a big part of why you do your reconciliation, so that you're always catching up. But when it comes to retainer, you clearly in that document want to define the nature, scope, client obligation, frequency of communication. Sometimes you also want to define whether you have a policy of accepting cash retainers. Some law firms stay away from cash retainers. The Law Society does have a certain cap up to which you can accept cash retainers. For example, in Ontario, I believe it's $7,500. Anything above that cannot be rendered to cash. It has to be through an electronic means or through a check, right? That's important. Termination clause, we've had examples where if you don't have a proper way of terminating a client engagement or that non-engagement, it might really come back to bite your back. Because if you've not had that closure, we've had horror stories where the client's gone back to sue the lawyer because a proper closure was never happened, and the client assumed that the lawyer was continuing to work for them, right? And we spoke about the advent of technology, and this is something we're starting to see with our retainer letters, with our clients and other friends in the legal industry, is about them outlining the risks of using technology that they use within their firm. And this is not, necessarily, it does not just stop with cloud. even email. It's not just cloud practice management software, email, or if it's a desktop solution, it's all of the bells and whistles that govern that technology as well. Okay. So we'll kind of move on to kind of the next checklist, a critical one of that, a financial management checklist. So let's kind of look at the different subcomponents of financial management checklist. And as I mentioned early on, I do pause to request you to ask any questions that you may have through our chat window, because we're definitely happy to answer that once we finish the session. And now let's say a well-defined retainer document, everything is fantastic. You always also want to understand or establish the rules about fee. We spoke about this, whether it's time and material, sometimes it's a capped time and material, it's a contingency-based fee, it's a combination fee, or it could be a flat fee with tax, flat fee without tax. So there's various different flavors of how you would actually, raise in docket and raise fees for your clients, right? So it's in best in your interest and your client's interest to have that documented. So the checklist is, what does that look like? How do you communicate the financial components of that? What is your procedure to generate receipts, especially if it's a cash transaction? Habit to always have a receipt available, okay? Again, to avoid any horror stories. If you don't have a receipt, then we've seen cases where the clients come back contesting the actual amount paid to begin with. Maybe it was $75, but if you don't have a receipt, we've had stories where clients have come back and said, I actually paid him $175, for example. Okay? And again, if you do deal with cash retainers, how do you demonstrate that you've exercised the necessary steps, such as ensuring that that cash retainer has been deposited into your trust account in no later than 1 day? So that's something that is very important as part of your audit, is that if you do accept cash retainers, that you do show them the trail, the audit trail of how that money has moved from your cash account into your trust account within 24 hours. Okay? So if you really want to take a quick view of the financial checklist, the core components that govern that would be step one, obviously in raising invoices. Okay? So those invoices are a big part of your financial management checklist. Raising them on a timely basis, so it's not just one fat invoice that scares the bejesus out of your client. You want to get them comfortable with paying you on a regular basis. If there's a retainer involved, generate those interim invoices and let them know that they've already paid for that, right? Ensuring that taxes are captured wherever appropriate. Certain disbursements do have tax, some disbursements don't. Ensuring that you've outlined that clearly in an invoice is very critical. First, sometimes clients may come back with a complaint or a concern about a fee. Maybe it was not something that was agreed upon, was not communicated properly. How do you deal with that? Sometimes clients come short with money. They say, hey, this is for a $100 bill. I'm sorry, it's just I have $50. How do you deal with a write-off or a discount that you may provide your client, right? Keeping a tab of your invoice balance. So now that you raised the invoice, it's very important for you as a law firm to keep a tab on who owes you money. There's two ways in which potentially people may owe you money. One is where you have failed to move any eligible trust money that's sitting in your trust account, and you've not moved it from your trust account into your general account, right? Very, very common. So the second, obviously, is a client payment. If someone owes you a client payment over and above the trust, or in the case where no trust was involved, just a client payment period, you definitely want to keep a tab on those invoice balances. Okay? And getting paid from trust. As I mentioned earlier, you want to keep it simple and ensure that you're dealing with disbursements out of your trust account, because it was never your money to begin with. unless you're collecting airplane miles, or if there's another reason why you're using your own general business credit card to deal with that, right? And the most important component is ensuring that you have a standard process, or the product or the technology that you're using has that built in, allowing you to never overdraw on trust. Okay? Or if you are, then it's a bad habit. How do you get away from that? Because that's the last thing you want to do. Is that's when one thing leads to another, and that's where it gets fuzzy, right? And there's a lot of nights spent in retracing your steps, if you will. And the last, getting paid into general. Okay. So again, going back to your disbursements, if you're using a general account to pay for your disbursements, then make sure that you raise that invoice on a timely basis so that you can recover that expense. And this is also equally important for you as a business, because the last thing you want to do is spend all that money on behalf of your client, incur that expense, and not have a process or a discipline, if you will, to be able to recover for it. So always keep a tab of it. Make sure that you know why you're spending that money, for which matter, okay? And be able to raise that invoice right on time so that you have the potential of recovering that. Now you've done all of that, you've kind of dealt with the fee book and expense book. The fee book obviously contains all of your revenue. The expense book contains all of your expenses, including your taxes. Now here are a few additional documents that the Law Society wants to capture. Ledgers and journals, your reconciliation statements, expense book, fee book, and all of their, and we'll talk about them quickly one at a time. Right? So we're looking at trust ledgers, very important. We actually have a webinar that exclusively talks about these specific documents and the details to which it's required to be documented across these documents. Right? So you've got your trust ledger, you've got your trust receipts and their disbursements, if they're managed and maintained properly. Managing a monthly reconciliation. Okay? Trust reconciliation, very important, so that you can clearly articulate or illustrate in the document about the bookkeeping numbers balancing or matching your bank numbers. If they're not matching, then you at least define and document why they're not matching. Maybe there was a bank error that you didn't catch. Maybe there was a certain date mismatch that you need to readjust. So all that's critical in illustrating in that reconciliation report. And when it comes to general account, very similar. Do you manage a general ledger? Do you manage receipts, much like trust receipts? Do you manage your expense journals or disbursement journals? Right? Very critical for you to know the different methods in which you've actually paid your expenses. Keeping a tab on your fee book, expense book, and the total record, and as I mentioned earlier, of write-offs and discounts as well. And it's as critical as it is to do your trust reconciliation, that you're ensuring that you're not, misappropriating trust money. It's equally important for you to be serious about your general reconciliation, because that helps you not only from an audit process, but also from your own ownership of a business. It gives you that full confidence about reconciling your general means. You're confident about the ledgers and the journals for your general account as well. And last but not the least, depending on your situation, whether you ask for taxes or not, at an appropriate time, obviously you're going to be asking for jurisdictional tax. In Ontario, there's HST. Other provinces have their own jurisdictional tax, including New Brunswick. How do you manage those taxes? How do you charge taxes? And how do you incur taxes as well? Okay. A quick segue, and we've spoken about this, ensuring that, through these documentations, how do you manage that you're communicating all of this to your client, because that's a very, very important responsibility that you have as a legal professional. For clarifying invoices, there are certain documents that you can generate, right? Very important would be your statement of activity. Even better if you can combine it with your bill of cost and statement of accounts. Okay, so do you have any procedures of how you would communicate what's happening within a matter? Sometimes clients do complain about the Law Society that there's a bit of a void, especially if it's a family matter and if it's elongating, it's going on for a long time. Sometimes there are complaints about these are specific individuals, specific cases, but there's a void or communication between the client and the legal professional. Okay, and we spoke about matter closure procedures as well. So now that we've looked at your practice review, how do you client intake, how do you manage matter files, how do you communicate with your client about the risks involved in dealing with the matters. We looked at financial management checklist, how do you ensure that you raise invoices on a timely basis, try and cover all the components of that invoice, dockets, how do you docket, various types of dockets, how do you disperse, is it a combination of between general and trust, raising those invoices on time, generating those invoices on time, and ensuring that you're getting paid, transferring money from trust to general, and generating all of those ledgers, journals, and the reconciliation statements. We move on to a technology review, okay, with another 10 to 12 minutes still remaining in this webinar. We want to focus and walk through the technology aspects. And as I said, the fourth one that we covered was professional conduct. And again, those are some things that we want are outside the preview of practice management, but it's something for you to definitely keep in mind. From a technology standpoint, the question really is, how are you prepared when that technology fails? Or if the possibility of that technology failure is a potential, or is a possibility, A, do you have a plan of action? B, if you do? If you don't, then you probably should have one, plan for one. And B would obviously be, if you have one, how well have you communicated to your client? Because it's equally important. As I said, it's a responsibility that you take up. And when it comes to technology, we've gone back in many of our other webinars, we've discussed how the technology in the legal industry has come a long way, right? This industry has been in existence for a very, very long time, at a time where technology did not necessarily exist. There was manual process for all of this. There was files and manila folders that were used. There was handwritten ledgers and journals. And, life existed then. But the advantage that you have today, and both challenges and advantages that you have today, is you have to do more with less, right? That's a given in today's context. And if you have to do more with less, why not take advantage of the technologies that exist to give you not only the competitive advantage, but also give you that peace of mind where you're spending that time for other better things in life, right? So that's the opportunity. The risk, obviously, with technology is keep in mind the components that you need to be aware of. If it's a cloud-based technology, obviously you want to ask yourself, what's the availability like? Where's the data being stored? Is this site encrypted? How does data get transferred from one device to another? Right? How do I safeguard the information of my client? The research is important for these things. You want to ask your individual vendors that you're looking at these questions. You want to talk to colleagues who use technology on the cloud of how they overcome these obstacles and how they've defined ways of the fallback mechanisms that they've defined, right? So this is all related to cloud. If it's not related to cloud, and if this is just, even if it's a desktop solution, then you still want to ask yourself, what happens when that laptop or desktop that's not connected to anything, what if that crashes? We've had challenges with, clients that have started to use cloud, and they were previously using a desktop environment where all it took was for one desktop server crash, lost all of their data, and they had to not, and there was, if they didn't have a good backup methodology in place, and they totally relied upon that one individual machine performing all the time, and God save them, because there's a lot of manual rewrite and rework that's required, right? Is your document management robust enough? Is it modern? Is it giving you the convenience, the cost convenience, as well as the convenience as a professional? Is it giving you that competitive edge so that you don't have to tell your client about waiting for you to get back to work? When you're actually 2 hours away, you may actually be able to send it right from your phone. Okay? Are you running antivirus software, or is your cloud provider doing that? How are they dealing with cloud hacks? How are they dealing with, intrusions from different other countries? Where is the data stored, etc. Right? So one is to be aware with the use of technology, the risks that come along with it, and B, once you're aware, be able to document it to a point that you can communicate that as prudent to your clients. For example, indicating the risks of using technology in your retainer agreement, such as I, lawyer ABC, outline that I would be using email as a means of communication, right? Outline all the risks involved of dealing with that, right? Because whether you use Gmail or Outlook, right, unless you have your own server, you're going to be using the cloud instance of, let's say, Office 365, then those emails, you don't store them locally. It's all available on the cloud. If you're using Gmail, then Google has all that on the cloud. There is a certain level of risk involved, even despite it being, Google, right? So the fact that it's on the cloud, you want to be aware of what those are, understand how you can deal with it. Okay. Most of cloud providers say 99.9% availability, because they're always aware that, that percentage is still required, because it's not a perfect world, right? And last but not the least, this was the slide we wanted to leave you with so that you can ponder over that and think about how you can use the modern tools that are available to you as a legal professional across jurisdictions, both, across provinces and within North America. There are tools, there are products that are out there focused and purpose-made for the legal industry, such as uLaw, which is a Canadian legal accounting and practice management software. And you have other softwares that help you across various other silos of your business, right? Ensuring, these legal accounting and practice management software does help not only from a timely capture of data, which is very critical, capturing the moment as and when things happen, whether it's a docket at the courthouse or there's an expense that you just incurred, and taking a quick picture of that and having it available to the point where it can actually get to you all of the Law Society's documents well done, all ready for you to go, for you to review. You don't have to, handwrite it anymore, and you can let the software do that for you. And what you're going to do is manage the information, ensure that you enter the data on a timely manner, train yourself to use these technologies the right way, and be cognizant and have a time schedule of delivering the content so that you can be audit ready at any time. So if you're already generating those monthly reconciliation statements, it doesn't worry you whether you're going to be audited today or 6 months from now, because you're on track to getting done what's required by design from day one, right? So what does it finally come down to? It comes down to compliance, saving you the time during audit and as well as audit preparation, avoiding any penalties, ensuring a better accountability, which helps you to track your business better, Tools can also provide you with deep dive analytics about your business, about questions that you didn't even know to ask about yourself. What area of practice am I best at? What areas of practice do I collect more taxes in? Where are my marketing dollars going, and how is that helping me bring revenue in a specific area of practice? So software tools, legal accounting softwares can help you do that and give you that information. And with mobility in mind, how can you take advantage of cloud software or other softwares that are available that can keep you as a competitive, mobile-friendly legal professional? Okay. And last but not the least, if, with time being money and money being what it is, how can you curtail costs without highly expensive expert services that are rendered? Okay. And if you are trying to be prudent about the money that you're spending to manage your business, then you obviously want to look at different ways in which you can maximize the money that you've just saved up. Now, this particular webinar is going to be recorded and available on our YouTube channel over the weekend. It'll probably be available early, mid next week. And hence, this snapshot of this screen is important. We've obviously captured some of the Law Society of Upper Canada, but I know it's very similar to the documentation the province of New Brunswick provides as well. We'll make sure we have that available on our website for you to review. But here are some really good documents that you can look at that clearly outlines the expected set of boundaries and policies and documents that you need to present as a legal professional. Okay? So right from especially the audit checklist as well as the bookkeeping guideline are two very important documents that I would highly recommend. And for those joining us today and don't know about us, we are a fairly new vendor in the scene, but we've been in business just under 5 years, serving our clients across Canada. We are our Canadian legal accounting and a practice management software company. We take compliance very seriously. We're cloud-based, and we do, again, our compliance is kind of the number one reason why people choose us. And again, if you want to give us a try, we welcome you to our website and do sign up for a 30-day no obligation trial. And I would sincerely welcome any questions that you may have at this time and any feedback on the webinar. And we'll look forward to hearing back from you in terms of any other subject areas that you would like us to present on as well. Thank you. Okay, we have our first question about how do we at uLaw manage these different components. I think the question is about whether we manage compliance, and if that's the question, I can quickly jump over to uLaw to kind of give you a quick snapshot. So at every stage, really depending on the life cycle, so this is our uLaw product. Within every life cycle stage, we have, set defined compliance documents, right from your client management. We spoke about the practice review, client management being a critical component, conflict screening reports to your source of contacts, to your matters. So we have compliance under your matters. That kind of forms, I believe, your practice management or practice review. So right from your client ID verification to even your disposition letters, right? So we've kind of all broken it down into subcomponents that you can start generating. And most importantly for us, and I think our claim to fame, truly is our ability to generate the financial documents, starting with your trust, trust ledgers and journals. It's done at a click of a button. If you wanted to do the monthly ledger, trust ledger for the month of December, It's just a click of a button in uLaw. Reconciliation is a breeze as well. You're just comparing uLaw with your bank record and really understanding what are the outstanding transactions, if any. Right now, this particular account is up to date because we've caught up with the bank. Okay? I hope that answered that question. I hope that was the question that I'm answering. Okay, perfect. It was. Fantastic. So here's a quick look at your trust account. I'm just using a playground account. But at a click of a button, it gives you pretty much the trust balances as well as, balance in trust right now is $500. Okay, so I hope that answered that question. So where is your data hosted? I think that's the next question. Our data is hosted in Canadian soil. We have our servers in Ottawa and in Quebec, Montreal. Okay, thank you everyone. We appreciate you participating and we look forward to you in our next webinar.